Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my initial thoughts and feelings on some of the brand new Transformers Studio Series figures which were just announced at Canada's Fan Expo. I knew that there was going to be reveals today, however I didn't think that there would be reveals to this magnitude, nor did I expect one of my most anticipated Transformers Studio Series figures ever to be revealed today, that being the Dark of the Moon Leader Class Shockwave. And here we have the high-res image of the Leader Class Dark of the Moon Shockwave, and I've got to say that this figure is everything I would have dreamt it to have been. This figure looks absolutely incredible. Shockwave was one of my favourite designs in Dark of the Moon and is really and truly my favourite design out of any of the Decepticons throughout the entire Transformers mythology, and I think that he's been replicated in the Studio Series form really well. Looking at the figure's robot mode first, this is almost dead on screen accurate representation of how he appeared in Dark of the Moon. They've almost recaptured every single element of Shockwave and he really does look fantastic. It's great to see that Shockwave finally has his more movie accurate full-on arm cannon as opposed to the original Voyager class, which was just his hand folded up and a mech-tech weapon put over the top. It looked good back in the day, but it doesn't hold a candle to this brand new Studio Series version. The hands on this figure look exceptionally detailed, and even the feet look really awesome. Looking at this high-res image, it does appear that he will in fact have a purple metallic paint deco, which I'm a massive fan of, as it harkens back to Shockwave's original G1 counterpart, and is also very similar to what we see in the movie. Turning now to Shockwave's tank mode, this looks very similar to that Voyager class figure that we got back in Dark of the Moon. The way that the sword accessory kind of plops on the hand and the fact that his fusion cannon becomes a turret, it does look very reminiscent of the original Voyager class Dark of the Moon figure. However, Shockwave was a character in the movie that never ever had an alt form, so with the release of this figure, we could almost guarantee that we will in fact be seeing characters that also didn't have alt modes, such as the entire Cybertron Bumblebee movie character cast, as well as the Fallen. This figure really does open the possibility for many other character releases who only appeared in the movie in their robot forms. The tank mode I think looks really well done, but of course I'm only going to display Shockwave in his robot mode. As you can see, Shockwave will in fact include the sword weapon that unfortunately we never saw him deploy in the movie, and he also has his rubber hose. It does definitely appear to be a rubber hose, just seeing how it bends, and it would make sense as that is how the majority of Shockwave figures have their hoses made out of rubber. The head sculpt on this figure looks spectacular as well, and not only does this figure include himself, but he also includes Wheelie and Brains. Now, the initial image that I showed earlier on did in fact show one of the Nest soldiers with a parachute. It's not shown in this high-res image, so perhaps it will be cut from the final release, as originally when I first saw that image, I did definitely think that it was quite a lot of content for a leader class price point, but if it hasn't been cut, this will definitely be one of the best leader class figures, as it is probably going to be the one that includes the most accessories, and it's Shockwave, one of my favourite characters ever. Now, as this is leader class, I do imagine this figure to be very similar in height to the Dark of the Moon leader Megatron, or even the Revenge of the Fallen Voyager Megatron, which was quite a tall figure. The only reason why I can imagine this being leader class is perhaps because it's a lot more bulky than your standard Voyager figure, and the fact that it will in fact include so many more accessories than some of your other Voyager figures. This figure definitely looks like it's going to be a great entry into the Studio Series figures, and it is a great way to kick off 2020's leader class assortment. Talking of leader class assortment, here is the second leader class figure to be announced as part of the 2020 Studio Series line, and that is CONSTRUCTICON Scavenger. Now, initially I wasn't too excited for this figure's release, as I did know this figure was coming out. You know, we did know this way back in last year's October. It was just a matter of fact of actually getting the images of how this figure would eventually look, and I must say once again, this figure does not disappoint. This absolutely destroys the original Voyager class figure that was released as part of the Revenge of the Fallen toy line. This figure looks absolutely fantastic, and I mean, just look at the figure's head sculpt. It's so detailed and so movie accurate. I really like how big and thick the tires are at the top of the figure. It'll be really interesting to see how they actually elongate and whether or not it will actually share similarities to how the conversion took place on the original Revenge of the Fallen Voyager figure. As for the construction vehicle mode, it does actually look quite faithful to what we see in the movie. However, there are some hollow spots and there are some gaps, and I do think that the tread should perhaps be slightly larger, but this has to combine into one of the torso sections of the Devastator, and it has to transform into a really unusual, very abstract looking robot design, so I can kind of excuse some of the inaccuracies. Getting back to the robot mode, this figure looks fantastic. We don't get any look of how it will appear when it is formed into Devastator's component, but looking at robot mode as well as the vehicle mode, it definitely looks like it's going to be a great entry into the Studio Series, and the only thing I really want to see now is how this figure will actually scale with some of the other Studio Series figures, as Scavenger slash Demolisher in the movie was a massive character. Optimus Prime was roughly the size of its face, so it'll be really interesting to see what this figure looks like in hand. Now, whilst on the topic of Constructicons, here we are going to be taking a look at the Voyager class assortment, and to start things off, here is our first look at Constructicon Mixmaster. Similarly to Scavenger, we did know that this figure was coming out, so it wasn't necessarily one that I was anticipating, as we already knew that this figure was confirmed. It was really just a matter of fact of how this figure was going to look when we got initial images of it. Now, looking at this image here, I don't necessarily want to say that I'm not impressed with it, as we haven't really got a great look at it, but I must say that from this image it definitely does look slightly underwhelming, and doesn't look as good as the original Voyager class Mixmaster, which in my opinion looks a lot better than this figure. Now, don't get me wrong, it definitely looks movie accurate, and I know that it has to turn into the head of Devastator, which something which the original had an advantage of, as it only had 2 modes, but the robot mode of this figure looks very, very thick, particularly in the chest, very bulky, and to me it looks very kind of messy as well. I do like how the cylindrical cylinders of the kind of mixing chamber end up on the shoulders and the arms. That is movie accurate, but I really don't like the smooth panels on Mixmaster's shins. It really doesn't look very good, and I don't like the feet of the figure whatsoever. The head sculpt looks pretty impressive, but I've got to say that the overall paint applications look really, really bland. You know, there's not much really going on the eyes, and I think, you know, some copper paint in the torso area really would have set some of the details apart from one another, as it stands, it really does just look like a very dark grey mess, which I guess is what a majority of the Decepticons look like in the Bayformers universe, but this figure I think really could have been better, and even with just a change in paint, I really think this figure could have looked so much better. As it stands though, it is a nice release. I think alt mode looks great. Once again, we don't have an image of how the figure will look like as Devastator's head, so that will definitely be really interesting to see, as there are no visible head components on Mixmaster's robot mode, nor on his truck mode. And turning to the final reveal, as well as the final Voyager class figure of the first wave of 2020 figures, here we have a Transformers 2007 Movie 1 Voyager class Megatron. Now, this was actually a figure that most of us knew was coming out. There was various listings for a Movie 1 Megatron, however they all kind of gave us the impression that it was going to be a leader class and that perhaps it would include a frenzy. So to see that this figure is in fact a Voyager class, considering how big the jet mode really should be, it has come as quite a surprise to me. Nevertheless, overall the figure does look pretty decent. Something which I didn't notice in the original images that I received is the fact that this does appear to be using some parts from the Revenge of the Fallen Voyager Megatron, most noticeably the entire torso section. I'm not entirely sure how well that's going to look in hand, as in this image it does kind of stand out from some of the rest of the components. Perhaps it's because I know that it is a reuse of pieces, but the other, all the other limbs etc. look really, really well done. I must say the head sculpt looks fantastic. The head sculpt from Movie 1 to Movie 2 is different, so it is great to see that they have in fact given us a new head sculpt, and the Studio Series has been really solid in giving us very detailed heads. Now, as for the rest of the figure, the legs do look really clunky, much like the Dark of the Moon leader Megatron. However, I do imagine that they will look a lot better in hand, and I guess because I have the movie masterpiece Movie 1 Megatron, I'm kind of biased to that figure, but I have got to remember that this is a Voyager class and is priced considerably less than that figure. So taking all that into account, this definitely does look like a great substitute, and it is great to finally conclude the Studio Series 2007 Autobot and Decepticon casts. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't been shown yet whether or not this figure will include Frenzy. Personally, as it's a Voyager class, I don't think that it will, which is a shame, as this really was our last hope to get Frenzy. Perhaps if they re-release Barricade, perhaps as a Dark of the Moon release, they can throw Frenzy in just for the Movie 1 fans, but the only accessory that this figure does appear to include is a chain weapon. Now, this chain weapon actually looks more accurate than the movie masterpiece version, which is quite surprising to see. I don't think that it will be articulated nor rubberized. I do just imagine it will be a plastic-like material, and it does look pretty detailed. Now, there aren't much in terms of paint deco on this figure, however that is to be expected, as Megatron has always been a kind of dark metallic gunmetal grey colour, similarly to the Voyager class ROTF Megatron, and if you do remember, that figure did subsequently get a repaint, so perhaps we can expect a battle damaged, perhaps dead version of this Megatron with an Allspark accessory. That would be really, really cool. Looking at the alien jet mode, I think that looks absolutely fantastic. The alien jet mode looks really accurate and very faithful to the 2007 movie, so that is awesome to see. And as a whole, this particular Megatron figure does actually look really good, despite some of my discrepancies here and there. So those are my initial thoughts and feelings on some of the new and upcoming Transformers Studio Series figures that are set to be released. That's the first wave of 2020. Each of these releases all look great in their own regards. Of course, Shockwave is by far the standout one to me, as that was one of the figures that I actually included in my top 5 most wanted Transformers Studio Series figures, so to have that figure in plastic form is really a dream come true to me, and it is such an improvement over the original version. I really am completely gobsmacked at how well done it actually is, and to think that it will actually be a leader class figure, something which the original Dark of the Moon toy line should have put Shockwave in, really has impressed me. I do think that Mixmaster is probably the weakest out of this entire assortment. Not to say that it's not a good figure, I do think that it does look good. It just doesn't look as detailed as some of the other figures, but it is going to have one of the most complex conversions, as Devastator's head in the movie doesn't look anything like Mixmaster's robot mode nor his truck mode, so perhaps those are all compromises that will eventually lead to the greater good. I do really like the 2007 Voyager Megatron, despite wishing that it was perhaps a leader class and did include Frenzy. I do think that what we do have does look really impressive, and I know that it does reuse some parts from the ROTF Megatron. However, I'm not entirely sure whether or not that is a drawback or not. I will really have to see some more images, perhaps in-hand images of it, and to really make up my mind. As for the leader class Scavenger, I think that figure looks incredible. I really think that the leader class assortment is where the Studio Series is at its best. You know, Grimlock and Blackout are astounding figures, as well as Jetfire. The Dark of the Moon Megatron was also a really good figure as well, however fell slightly short of some of the other leaders, but both of the leaders that are featured in this assortment are by far one of the best, and the Studio Series is really kicking 2020 off with a bang, as we've also got a really solid line of deluxe figures also coming out in the form of the Movie 1 Bumblebee, World War II Hot Rod, the RC Elita 1 and Chromia 3-pack, and not forgetting the Dark of the Moon Soundwave with Laserbeak. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know down in the comment section below, and be sure to let me know your thoughts and feelings on some of these Studio Series reveals, and let me know which Studio Series figures you are most excited for as part of the 2020 toy line. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and until my next video, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.